October 14, 1943, 400 feet beneath the surface of the East China Sea. A sound like the devil beating a sledgehammer against an iron coffin slammed into the port side. The USS Stingray shuddered, a living thing in its death throes. Lights flickered, plunging the control room into a nightmare of swinging shadows and panicked faces before flaring back to a dim, hellish orange. Freezing water sprayed from a seam in the overhead, stinging the eyes of the helmsman. The air was thick, a toxic soup of sweat, ozone from short-circuited electronics, and the coppery tang of fear. Sonarman First Class Arthur Lynch didn't flinch. His world had contracted to the confines of the rubber ear cups pressed against his head. His eyes squeezed shut. He was the boat's ears, and what he heard was a symphony of their impending doom. Ping, ping, ping. The Japanese destroyer's active sonar was an icy needle drilling into his brain. Behind it, the sound he was truly tracking, the high-pitched, frantic whine of the destroyer's twin screws, cutting through the water directly overhead. He could feel the ship's weight, its malice, through the sound alone. "She's making another run, Captain." Art's voice was a low monotone, a bizarre calm in the center of the storm. "Bearing 180 relative. Speed, 20 knots. She's lining up for the kill." Captain J.P. Heller, his face a mask of grim concentration in the red light, braced himself against the periscope well. "All stop. Make your depth 420 feet. The command was quiet, a prayer offered to the deep. The deck tilted sharply downward as the plane's men fought the boat's natural buoyancy, driving them deeper into the abyssal pressure. The hull groaned in protest, a long, deep moan of stressed steel. Crump, boom, crump. 3 more depth charges. Closer this time. The concussions slammed men into their equipment. A glass gauge shattered. The sound was physical, a fist punching through the pressure hull and squeezing every heart in the room. "Pressure in the forward torpedo room," a voice yelled over the intercom. "We're taking water around the starboard shaft seal." They were below test depth, leaking, and trapped. The Japanese skipper above them was a veteran, his pattern relentless and precise. He knew he had them. Art listened, his mind a supercomputer of acoustic data. He filtered out the chaos, the hiss of leaks, the frantic reports, the hammering of his own heart. He focused on the destroyer's signature. A Sashio class. 4,000 tons. Armed with depth charge throwers and a vicious sonar suite of its own. He could hear the specific rhythm of its propellers, the cavitation telling him its exact speed and turn rate. Then he heard it. The space between the ticks. "Captain," Art said, his eyes snapping open, meeting Heller's. "He's passing over us now. His screws are bearing 270. He's going to lose us in his wake. It's our only shot." Heller's jaw tightened. Turning toward the destroyer's wake was suicide. It was a blind, desperate lunge. But staying here was a guaranteed death sentence. "All ahead full. Right full rudder. Bring us to 180. Make your depth 100 feet. Ready bow tubes 1 and 2. Heller's voice cut through the din, a blade of decisive action. The electric motors whined in protest as the massive boat began a slow, agonizing turn upward. The deck tilted precariously. Men held on to whatever they could. Art kept his ears locked on the target. "He's turning, coming back around. He's heard us." Bearing 175, speed increasing. They were rising out of the deep, driving straight toward the surface, and the destroyer that was now turning to finish them off. "Up periscope." Heller snapped, grabbing the handles and spinning around. He took a quick, brutal look. "Jesus. He's right on us. Bearing matches. Distance, 800 yards. He's presenting his bow. It's a down-the-throat shot. A near-impossible shot. A single, desperate torpedo against the charging, knife-edge profile of a warship. Set gyro angle 0. Final bearing set. The fire control coordinator yelled. "Solution ready, Captain." Art confirmed, his voice tight. Heller remained at the periscope, his body rigid. "Flood tube 1. Open outer door." A series of clunks and hisses echoed through the boat. The tension was a physical force, suffocating every man. Tube 1 ready. Outer door open. The destroyer was closing at over 30 knots. They had seconds. Heller's order was a whisper that carried the weight of their entire world. Fire 1. A violent whoosh of compressed air, a jolt that shook the entire boat. The torpedo was away. Silence. An agonizing, deafening silence broken only by the frantic pinging of the enemy sonar and the ever louder whine of the destroyer's screws. 5 seconds. Art listened, his entire being focused on the sound of their Mark 14 torpedo swimming toward its target. He heard its propeller, a steady, whirring hum, and then nothing. No explosion. Just the relentless advance of the destroyer. The world did not end in a fireball. It ended in a gut-wrenching, silent failure. The whirring hum of the Mark 14 torpedo's propeller had simply vanished from Art's headphones, swallowed by the sea. No detonation. No cataclysmic roar of a direct hit. Just the relentless, ever-louder whine of the Asashio-class destroyer's screws as it charged, its bow knife-edged and aimed directly at their heart. "Dud!" someone screamed, the word tearing through the control room like shrapnel. It was a goddamn dud. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze them all. They had bet everything on that single shot, and the Navy's broken weapon had betrayed them. Rig for depth charge. Take her deep. All ahead flank. Dive, dive, dive. Captain Heller's voice was a roar, cutting through the despair. The deck tilted violently downward once more as the electric motors screamed, dragging the Stingray back into the crushing embrace of the deep. Art tore the headphones from his ears, the pinging sonar and the destroyer's engines now an audible taunt in the control room. He looked at the captain, and in that moment, he wasn't a sonar man first class. He was the watchmaker's son from Toledo, seeing a critical gear sheared clean in half. "The magnetic exploder," Art said, his voice low but cutting through the chaos. "It's the Mark 6 magnetic exploder, Captain. It's too sensitive. It's detonating prematurely or not at all. The contact pistol must have failed too. It's a flawed design." Chief Brennan, the grizzled chief of the boat, snarled from his station near the hydroplane controls. "We're riding a billion-dollar boat, armed with a 2-cent fuse. I told them at Pearl." Crump, boom, boom, crump. The world dissolved into noise and violence. The destroyer, having missed its initial kill, was enraged. It unleashed a full pattern of depth charges, a dozen barrels of TNT set to explode at different depths. The Stingray was thrown like a toy in a dog's mouth. Lights blew out, plunging them into near-total darkness save for the emergency battle lanterns that swung wildly, casting lunatic shadows. A main seawater line aft ruptured with a terrifying hiss, spraying the engine room with a high-pressure jet of freezing ocean. "Report. Damage report," Heller yelled, clinging to the plotting table. The responses crackled over the intercom, voices tight with strain. "Forward battery compartment taking water. Fire in the maneuvering room. We're losing trim, Captain." They were being systematically hammered into a molten scrap at the bottom of the sea. Art, thrown against his sonar console, felt a sharp pain in his ribs. As he pushed himself up, his hand brushed against the cold, dial-covered face of the JT sonar unit. It was just a machine, a collection of wires and vacuum tubes. But to him, it was a watch. A complex, unforgiving timepiece counting down the seconds of their lives. He closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in focus. He forced his breathing to slow, forcing his heart to stop its frantic hammering against his ribs. He blocked out the screams, the hissing steam, the groaning metal. He listened only to the symphony of destruction. Ping, whine, crump, ping. He could hear the destroyer's engines. He could hear the specific rhythm of its propellers. He could hear the splash of its next volley of charges hitting the water, calculating their sink rate in his mind. "Captain," Art said, his voice eerily calm once more, a lone still point in a hurricane. "He's turning for another run. Bearing 090. He's dropping a full pattern now." The charges hit the water. 6 distinct splashes. 5 seconds, Art whispered, his eyes still closed. 4, 3, 2, 1. The depth charges exploded. But this time, the hellish CRUMPs were farther away, off the starboard beam. The boat shuddered, but it was a glancing blow. Heller stared at Art, seeing the young man not as a sailor, but as an instrument. A human computer processing data no machine could. He thinks we're still turning to port, Art continued, his mind weaving a tactical picture from sound alone. He's chasing our ghost. But his last run, he passed directly over us. His wake is still churning above. It's masking our acoustic signature. It's our only cover. He opened his eyes and looked at Heller, the red battle lights reflecting in his glasses. Recommend we go to all stop and dead slow, right here. Let him chase the noise we're not making. Let him think he's finished us. It was a monstrous gamble. To stop moving was to become a sitting duck. It relied entirely on the enemy's overconfidence and the chaotic acoustic blanket of his own wake. Captain Heller held Art's gaze for a long second. He saw no fear there, only a terrifying, precise certainty. He made his decision. All stop, Heller commanded, his voice low. All ahead dead slow. Silence throughout the boat. The whine of the electric motors died to a faint, almost imperceptible hum. The crew froze in place, not daring to move, not daring to speak. The only sounds were the dripping of water, the faint hiss of the air circulators, and the distant, receding ping, ping, ping of the enemy sonar. Art put his headphones back on. Every man watched him, their lives hanging on the subtle shifts in his expression. He listened to the destroyer's screws fade to the north. He listened as the pinging grew fainter, more frustrated. After 10 agonizing minutes, he finally looked up and met the captain's eyes. "He's breaking off, sir," Art said, the words draining the tension from the room like a released valve. "He's increasing speed to 25 knots. Bearing 020. He's leaving." A collective, shuddering breath was exhaled by 80 men. They had survived. But as the immediate terror receded, a cold, hard anger took its place. They had faced the enemy and executed a perfect attack. And they had been defeated, not by the Japanese, but by their own flawed weapons. Captain Heller walked over to Art's station, his face etched with a new kind of resolve. He placed a hand on the sonar console. "That magnetic exploder, sonarman Lynch," the captain said, his voice quiet but iron hard. "And the contact pistol. You're sure?" Art nodded, the watchmaker's son seeing the broken mechanism with perfect clarity. "As sure as I am of the sound of his screws, Captain. The system is broken." Heller's eyes swept the control room, meeting the gazes of his chiefs and officers. "Then we're going to fix it," he said. The air in the forward torpedo room was a potent mix of sweat, hydraulic fluid, and a simmering, focused rage. 6 men, led by Chief Brennan and Art Lynch, surrounded a Mark 14 torpedo that had been wrestled from its rack. It lay in its cradle like a sedated beast, long, ominous, and profoundly untrustworthy. The rest of the crew moved with hushed urgency around them, patching leaks, assessing damage, and steering the Stingray on a silent, creeping course away from the hunting grounds. The boat itself felt wounded, its usual rhythms replaced by the groan of stressed frames and the constant, faint drip of water. "All right, Professor," Chief Brennan grunted, slapping the cold steel casing of the torpedo. "The floor is yours. Tell us how to fix the Navy's $2 billion mistake." Art, his hands already black with grease, didn't smile. He ran a finger over the seam where the contact pistol sat in the warhead. "It's not one mistake, Chief. It's 2. The magnetic exploder is the primary flaw. It's designed to detect the magnetic field of a ship's hull and detonate beneath it, breaking its back. But the sensitivity is calibrated for the magnetic latitude of Newport, Rhode Island, not the freaking Pacific. It's detecting the Earth's field, or the wake of a fish, and detonating early. Or it's just failing." He moved to the nose, his touch surprisingly gentle. "And this," he tapped the contact pistol, a complex mechanism of pins, levers, and springs, "is the backup. It's supposed to trigger on physical impact. But the firing pin is too weak. A glancing blow, or a hit at an oblique angle, and it just jams. It's a watch that can't keep time if you tilt it. He looked at the assembled torpedo men, their faces skeptical but desperate for a solution. We need to become gunsmiths. We're going to disable the magnetic exploder, make it a pure contact weapon. And we're going to physically modify every contact pistol in our inventory to make it harder, faster, and more reliable. The chief stared at him. Disable a primary weapon system? That's a court-martial offense, Lynch. So is getting every man on this boat killed because our torpedoes are swimming past targets and clicking harmlessly against their hulls, Art replied, his voice still calm, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. It's a simple choice, Chief. We follow the manual and die, or we rewrite it and live. There was a long silence, broken only by the drip of a leaky valve. Then Chief Brennan nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. You heard the man. Let's break out the tools. And not a word of this goes in the log. What followed was a scene of bizarre, underground engineering. Using wrenches, files, and a small precision lathe meant for repairing gauge fittings, they set to work. Art, his watchmaker's instincts taking over, became the lead surgeon. He showed them how to carefully unscrew the magnetic influence housing and remove the delicate, finely wound copper coils within, rendering the system inert. Then came the contact pistols. One by one, they were disassembled on a clean rag laid out on the deck grates. Under Art's direction, the torpedo men used fine grit files to sharpen the tips of the firing pins, removing the slightest burr or imperfection. They tested the spring tension, and where they found it wanting, they cannibalized stronger springs from spare parts kits, from broken gauges, even from a wrench handle one of the men had brought aboard. It's about energy, Art explained, holding a modified pistol up to the dim worklight. A weaker spring stores less potential energy. It can't overcome the friction of a glancing impact. This new spring, he said, compressing it with a satisfying firmness. It wants to release. It's eager. It turns a tentative tap into a decisive strike. 4 hours, they worked. The sound of metal scraping against metal, the click of parts being reassembled, the low, muttered curses and instructions. It was a liturgy of rebellion against the incompetence of faraway admirals. The crew, passing through, would pause and watch, a new kind of respect in their eyes for the quiet sonar man who spoke the language of machines. Finally, as the chronometer showed 0400, they were done. 16 torpedoes, their forward sections now housing the modified, hot, contact pistols, sat ready in their tubes and racks. They were no longer the Navy's weapons. They were the stingrays. Exhausted, Art leaned against a torpedo tube, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Captain Heller appeared in the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene of organized chaos. "Report," Heller said, his voice low. Chief Brennan stood up, holding a modified and a stock contact pistol. He handed them to the captain. "The magnetic exploders are neutralized, sir. And we've given the contact pistols a personality adjustment. They're meaner now." Heller hefted the two mechanisms, feeling the difference in spring tension. He looked from the chief's grimly satisfied face to Art's exhausted, grease-smudged one. "Will they work, Lynch?" Art met his gaze. "The mechanism is sound, Captain. The physics are now on our side. The rest is up to fate." A faint, grim smile touched Heller's lips. "Fate has had its turn. It's our turn now." He handed the pistols back to the chief. "Load all forward tubes. We're going hunting at first light." The order was given. The modified fish were slid into the tubes with a series of heavy, final thuds. The stingray, no longer a fugitive, was rearming its fangs. As the crew worked, a new sound echoed from the sonar shack, the faint, distant thrum of a lone merchant ship, plodding and unaware through the pre-dawn darkness. Art didn't need headphones to hear it. He could feel it in the water. The hunt was back on. Dawn on the surface was a gray smear bleeding across a heaving, empty sea. The USS Stingray broached with a sigh of releasing pressure, venting foul air and tension into the damp morning. On the bridge, Captain Heller swept the horizon with his binoculars, his knuckles white. Below, in the control room, the atmosphere was electric, a volatile mix of exhaustion and a desperate, burning hope. All eyes were on the sonar shack, where Art Lynch listened to the world. The merchantman's acoustic signature was a slow, fat, and beautiful rhythm. A single-screw freighter, its propeller slapping the water with a lazy, inefficient cadence. No escort. A perfect target. A lamb wandering into a wolf's den. Target designated Sierra 1. Art's voice came over the intercom, calm and precise. Bearing 285. Speed 8 knots. Range 5,000 yards. Intercept course plotted. Very well, Heller's voice crackled back from the bridge. Battle station's torpedo. The klaxon blared, a jarring sound that sent men sprinting to their positions. This was no longer a drill. This was the test. The entire boat's faith was now invested in the greasy, unauthorized modifications they had made in the dark. Art remained at his station, the ear cups a second skin. He was the scope the enemy couldn't see. He tracked the freighter, calling out minute changes in bearing. He's zigging, slight turn to port. Steady now, coming back to base course. In his mind, he could see it. A 5,000-ton Maru, its hull packed with rubber, rice, or maybe aviation fuel for the Japanese war machine. It was a cog in their enemy's machine, and they were the watchmakers, about to throw a wrench into the works. In the forward torpedo room, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and hydraulic oil. Chief Brennan stood over the torpedo data computer, his eyes flicking between the dials and the voice tube. The fish in tubes 1 and 2 were their children now. They had rebuilt them, given them a new purpose. The torpedo men stood by their charges, hands resting on the cold steel, as if imparting a final silent blessing. Final bearing and shoot, Heller's order came down, crisp and clear. Set! The fire control coordinator yelled. Solution ready, Art confirmed, his voice a steady rock in the rising tide of anxiety. On the bridge, Heller took one last look. The ship was a smudge on the horizon, oblivious. He lowered the binoculars. Fire 1. Whoosh. The boat jolted. A torrent of bubbles rushed past the hull. Art listened, his entire world narrowing to the sound of the torpedo, their torpedo. He heard the steady, confident whir of its propeller, a sound he'd heard a dozen times before, always ending in disappointment. This time was different. He willed it forward, a silent prayer sent down the wire. Fire 2. Whoosh. Another jolt. Another fish in the water. Then, silence. The longest 27 seconds of Arthur Lynch's life. He could hear the freighter's screw, still pounding its lazy rhythm. He could hear the heartbeat thrumming in his own ears. He could feel the breath of every man in the control room, held in unison. The first torpedo was supposed to hit. Now, nothing. A cold stone of despair formed in his gut. They had failed. They had risked a court-martial for nothing. The mechanisms were still. Crump. The sound was not a sharp crack, but a deep, volcanic, gut-punching thud that traveled through the water and shook the Stingray's hull. It was the sound of a ship's spine being broken. A split second later, crump. The second torpedo struck, a confirmation, an exclamation point of destruction. The control room erupted. A roar of pure, unadulterated triumph tore from 80 throats at once. Men slammed their hands on consoles, whooping, hugging, their faces transformed by a savage joy. The curse was broken. The broken gun was fixed. Con sonar, Art said, fighting to keep his voice professional, though a smile was breaking through his stoicism. 2 solid hits. Sierra 1's screw has stopped. Break-up noises heard. She's going down. Chief Brennan's voice, thick with emotion, came over the intercom from the torpedo room. They work, Captain. By God, they work. The Stingray crept closer to witness the kill. Through the periscope, Captain Heller watched the death throes. The freighter was low in the water, its back broken, a plume of black smoke and steam pouring from its innards. Japanese sailors scrambled for lifeboats. There was no triumph in Heller's eyes, only a cold, grim satisfaction. They had done their job. He turned to the officer of the deck. Secure from battle stations. Let's get the hell out of here before their friends show up. As the boat turned to slip back into the deep, Art finally took off his headphones. The cheers of the crew echoed around him, but he felt a strange quiet within. He had solved the puzzle. He had fixed the clock. But the ticking he heard now was the clock of those sailors in the water, counting down the minutes of their lives. He had wanted to be the space between the ticks, the silent, decisive factor. He had just discovered that the silence after the explosion was the loudest sound of all. The victory was real. The legend of the Stingray had begun. But as the boat dove, leaving the carnage and the survivors behind, Art Lynch, the watchmaker from Toledo, felt the first cold weight of what they had truly built in that torpedo room. Not just a reliable weapon, but an efficient killer. The single kill had unleashed something primal within the Stingray. The gnawing anxiety of faulty weapons was replaced by a cold, predatory confidence. They were no longer a wounded animal limping through the deep. They were a shark, and the water was thick with blood. The next 72 hours blurred into a relentless, brutal rhythm of hunt, kill, and vanish, a symphony of destruction composed by Captain Heller and conducted by Art Lynch's ears. Day 1, 1400 hours. Art's headphones picked up the distinct, heavy-throated rumble of a tanker. It was a larger, slower sound than the freighter, a deep, laborious beat that spoke of thousands of tons of precious oil in its belly. New contact, Captain. Designate Sierra 2. Bearing 310. Class, large tanker. Single escort, small patrol boat. The approach was textbook. Heller maneuvered the Stingray into a perfect position ahead of the tanker's path. The sea was calm, a glassy sheet under a pale sun. Fire 1. Fire 2. The modified torpedoes ran straight and true. The first struck amidships. The effect was cataclysmic. The deep KRUMMP was instantly swallowed by a secondary, world-ending explosion that hammered the submarine even from 2,000 yards away. A fireball of unbelievable violence bloomed on the horizon, roiling into a black, oily mushroom cloud. The tanker, a Nippon-class oiler, simply disintegrated, its burning fuel painting the sea in a hellish, spreading tapestry of flame. The escort, terrified, fired a few wild depth charges into empty water before fleeing at high speed. The Stingray slid beneath the waves, leaving the inferno to light the sky. Day 2, 9:30 hours. A convoy. 2 more freighters, another tanker, and 2 sharper, aggressive screw sounds, Kaiboken escort vessels, Japanese subchasers. This was a fight. "They know we're here, Captain," Chief Brennan muttered in the control room. "They're getting nervous." "Good," Heller replied, his eyes on the plot. "Nervous men make mistakes. Art, give me a melody." Art became the conductor of the chaos. He tracked all 5 ships, his voice a steady stream of data in the tense quiet. Escort Alpha bearing 070, turning towards us. He's pinging. Tanker bearing 345, steady. Escort Bravo holding position astern of the convoy. Heller used the data like a master swordsman. He slipped the Stingray between the escorts, a shadow sliding through a closing door. They fired a spread of 3 torpedoes from the stern tubes at the trailing freighter and the tanker. The sounds of hits were simultaneous, a satisfying symphony of tearing metal. One of the escorts, blind with rage, charged directly over their position, its depth charges exploding far above as the Stingray had already twisted away into the deep. They left a freighter sinking and a tanker dead in the water, billowing smoke. Day 3, 4 o'clock hours. The atmosphere aboard the boat had changed. The crew moved with a quiet, deadly efficiency. They were veterans now. The cloying smell of cordite from the deck gun, used to finish off the crippled tanker, mingled with the ever-present stench of sweat and diesel. Men's eyes were ringed with fatigue, but they shone with a hard light. They had sunk 5 ships. They were legends in the making, and they knew it. It was in this pre-dawn darkness that Art heard the new sound. It was faint at first, then sharpened into a terrifyingly familiar signature. Ping, ping, ping. But it wasn't 1. It was 2. Then a third. "Captain," Art's voice cut through the morning watch's exhaustion, laced with a new tension. "Multiple high-frequency sonar contacts. Bearing 180, 210, and 240. Fast screws. A Sashio class. Maybe Kajiro. They're spreading out." Captain Heller was at his side in moments. A hunter-killer group. Yes, sir, Art said, listening intently. They're not searching randomly. They're methodical. They're boxing the area. They know our approximate position from the last attack. The control room went dead quiet. The triumphant mood of the last 2 days evaporated, replaced by the cold chill of a calculated trap. They had been too successful. Too loud. The Imperial Japanese Navy had taken notice and sent their best. The Stingray crept along at silent running, a mouse trying to evade 3 circling cats. Art tracked each destroyer, painting a terrifying picture on the plot. They were working in tandem, herding them, their pings getting closer, the whine of their turbines a constant, threatening hum in the water. They've got us on a bearing line, Art reported, his voice tight. The one to the south is driving us north, into the waiting arms of the other 2. He listened again, his face pale under the dim lights. The pings were overlapping now, a cage of sound closing around them. He could hear the specific, aggressive pitch of the lead destroyer's sonar, more advanced, more persistent than the others. Captain, Art said, looking up, his eyes wide with a sudden, dreadful realization. This one, the lead ship, the sonar operator is good. Really good. He's not chasing ghosts. He's following our baffles. He's reading the water like a book. He swallowed, the truth of their situation dawning on him. They're not just trying to sink us, sir. They've identified us. The devil shadow. They're here for us. The pinging became a metronome of doom. 3 distinct, insistent rhythms, overlapping and intersecting, weaving a cage of sound around the USS Stingray. The lead destroyer, the one Art had identified as dangerously skilled, held its bearing, herding them northward, while its companions closed the pincers. The boat was running deep and silent, every non-essential system shut down, the crew holding their breath as if the mere sound of their lungs could betray them. "All stop," Captain Heller whispered into the unnerving quiet. The faint hum of the electric motors died, leaving them in absolute acoustic stealth, drifting like a ghost in the deep. The only sounds were the creaks and groans of the hull protesting the immense pressure, and the relentless, mocking ping, ping, ping from above. Art's world was his headphones. He was blind, but he saw everything. He could picture the 3 hunters, their sharp bows cutting the water, their crews eager for the kill. He tracked the lead ship, its screw sounds growing louder, more defined. "He's making his run," Art said, his voice a low monotone that belied the churn in his gut. "Bearing 190. Speed 25 knots. He's confident. He's not zigzagging." The crew braced themselves. There was nothing to do but wait and take it. The first depth charges hit the water. Art heard the distant splush, splush, splush of 6 barrels from the destroyer's K-gun throwers. He calculated their sink rate, the trajectory, the time to impact. 5 seconds, he whispered. The world exploded. Crump, boom, boom, crump. The concussions were deafening, hammer blows against the steel pressure hull. The boat was thrown violently to port. Lights flickered madly. Men were slammed against bulkheads. A shower of cork insulation rained down from the overhead, filling the air with a bitter, dusty cloud. A pipe junction in the corner shrieked and sprayed a jet of high-pressure seawater across the control room before a damage control party leapt on it with a wrench and a rubber patch. "Report," Heller barked, his voice strained as he held onto the periscope well. "Minor leaks in control. Battery compartment secure," came the calls. They had been lucky. The pattern was close, but not a direct hit. But the destroyer wasn't done. It was turning, its screws a fading whine that then began to grow again as it circled back. "He's coming around for another pass," Art reported, his ears ringing from the explosions. "Bearing 210 now. He's adjusting his aim." The second run was worse. The charges fell closer. The explosions were brighter, louder, each one a personal assault on the senses. A light fixture shattered, sending glass skittering across the deck plates. The smell of ozone from short-circuited electronics mixed with the stench of fierce sweat and the damp, metallic tang of the sea. The boat shuddered like a living thing in its death throes. Art felt a warm trickle of blood run down his temple where he'd been thrown against his console. He closed his eyes, blocking out the visual chaos, the terrified faces, the swinging battle lanterns. He dove deep into the soundscape. He listened past the ringing in his ears, past the groaning hull, past the hissing leaks. Ping, whine, ping. He focused on the lead destroyer. He could hear the specific rhythm of its engines, the cavitation of its screws. He could hear the faint, almost imperceptible change in its sonar return as it passed through the turbulent water of its own wake. And then he heard it. The space between the ticks. "Captain," Art said, his voice cutting through the post-detonation silence, eerily calm. The last pattern was shallow. "He's overcorrecting. He thinks we're trying to go deeper." Heller wiped a trickle of blood from his lip. "What are you seeing, sonar man?" "He's turning away to port. To reload his throwers. His wake is churning, sir. It's a massive acoustic shadow. It's masking us." Art opened his eyes, meeting the captain's desperate gaze. He knew the gamble he was proposing was insane. It defied all submarine doctrine. It was the move of a cornered animal, not a warship. "If we go to full power right now," Art said, every word precise, "we can slip into his baffles, his blind spot directly astern. We can surface right behind him. He won't hear us. He won't see us. Not until it's too late." The control room fell utterly silent. Surfacing? In the middle of a destroyer hunt? It was tantamount to suicide. Chief Brennan was the first to break the silence. "Captain, if he so much as glances at his aft lookout." "He won't," Art interjected, his certainty absolute. "He's focused on his reload. His sonar is deafened by his own wake. His entire crew is looking forward, expecting to see our oil and debris. They're celebrating. I can hear it in their engine rhythm. They think they've won." Captain Heller stared at Art, at this young man from Toledo who saw naval warfare as a series of interlocking gears. He saw no bluff, no fear, only a terrifying, logical certainty. They were in an iron coffin, and Art was pointing to the one, seemingly locked hatch. He made the choice. All ahead flank. Blow main ballast. Full rise on the planes. Bring us up. Now, now, now. The order was a thunderclap. The electric motors screamed to life, a roaring declaration of war after the long silence. The high-pressure air roared into the ballast tanks, forcing out the water with a sound like a dying beast taking its first breath. The deck tilted sharply upward as the Stingray, like a leviathan awakened, pointed its bow toward the surface and the enemy lurking just above. The ascent was a violent, gut-wrenching climb. The Stingray tore towards the surface, its hull groaning under the radical pressure change. In the control room, men were thrown off their feet, grabbing for handholds as the deck tilted at a dizzying angle. The roar of the blown ballast tanks was deafening, a desperate mechanical scream announcing their audacious play. On the bridge, Captain Heller and the lookouts burst through the hatch into a world of shocking sensory overload. After the stale, metallic air of the boat, the cold, salt-tinged wind was a physical slap. The darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the faintest hint of pre-dawn gray on the horizon. And there, so close they could almost touch it, was the towering black silhouette of the Japanese destroyer, its stern to them, its own wake a churning, phosphorescent road leading right to its heart. "Right full rudder. Line us up. Man the deck gun. All 40 MMS, open fire." Heller roared, his voice raw. Chaos and fury erupted on the deck below. The 5-inch/25 caliber deck gun, already manned by a crew who had drilled for this in their sleep, thundered to life. The flash was blinding, momentarily illuminating the shocked faces of the Japanese sailors visible on the destroyer's aft deck. The shell screamed across the narrowing gap and exploded against the base of the destroyer's rear torpedo mount. A secondary explosion bloomed, lighting the night in an orange hell. The Stingray's twin 40mm Bofors cannons joined the chorus, their rapid percussive thump-thump-thump stitching lines of fiery tracers across the destroyer's superstructure. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The element of surprise was total, and for a glorious, brutal 30 seconds, They were the hunters again. But the surprise wouldn't last. The destroyer was a veteran, its crew battle-hardened. Alarms blared across the water. The massive ship began a slow, agonizing turn to port, its aft gun mounts already traversing, seeking the impudent submarine that had dared surface in its den. "Helm, hard to starboard. Keep our bow pointed at him," Heller yelled, his eyes locked on the destroyer. They were in a knife fight now, and they had to get their blow in before the giant could bring its full strength to bear. Below, Lynch stood frozen in the conning tower, just below the bridge, his assigned role as spotter forgotten in the face of the visceral reality before him. This wasn't sound through headphones. This was the concussive blast of their own gun, the smell of burning cordite so thick it choked the air, the screams of men, both American and Japanese, carried on the wind. He saw the destroyer's secondary batteries open up, the muzzle flashes like camera bulbs popping, the shells whipping past the Stingray's hull with a sound like tearing canvas. "We can't win a gunnery duel, Captain," the OD shouted over the din. "He's turning his main battery." Heller knew. He could see the destroyer's forward 5-inch turret slowly, inexorably, swinging towards them. In a minute, maybe less, they would be obliterated. His eyes snapped down to Art, who was staring pale and wide-eyed at the unfolding spectacle. "Lynch. The bearing. Give me the final bearing. Now." The command cut through Art's days. He wasn't a warrior on a deck. He was a watchmaker in a shop. The destroyer was a complex mechanism, and he could see its fault line. He didn't need the TDC. He could feel the geometry. "Bearing 035, Captain," Art yelled, his voice finding its steady core amidst the bedlam. "Range 400 yards. Gyro angle 0. He's presenting his full broadside. It's now or never." Heller didn't hesitate. He leaned into the voice pipe, his order the last, best hope of the USS Stingray. "Fire all stern tubes." From the aft torpedo room, the last 3 modified Mark 14s were launched. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The boat shuddered with the sequential release. 3 streaks of bubbles raced through the black water, the distance so laughably short that the torpedoes barely had time to arm themselves. Aboard the Japanese destroyer, they saw the trails. The turn became more frantic, desperate. It was too late. The first torpedo struck just aft of amidships. The crump was a deep, resonant gong of doom. The second hit a fraction of a second later, directly under the forward magazine. The resulting explosion defied description. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical force that hit the men on the Stingray's bridge like a wall, knocking them from their feet. A sun seemed to ignite amidships of the destroyer, a white-hot core of destruction that vaporized steel, guns, and men. The ship lifted from the water, its back broken in a single, catastrophic instant. The third torpedo hit the floating aft section, a coup de grace that sent what remained sliding beneath the waves in a maelstrom of steam, fire, and screaming metal. In less than a minute, the mighty warship was gone. The sudden silence that fell was more shocking than the battle itself. The only sounds were the crackle of the Stingray's own fires, the hiss of water on hot steel, and the desperate, fading cries from the sea. Captain Heller pulled himself to his feet, his ears ringing. He looked out at the oil-slicked, debris-littered water, the grave of the 6th ship in 3 days. He then looked down at Lynch, who was still clutching the railing, his knuckles white, his face a mask of soot and stunned horror. Heller's voice was hollow, stripped of all triumph. 6 ships in 3 days. They'll never believe it. He stared at Art, his eyes searching for something in the young man's face. "What have we become, Lynch?" The return voyage was a ghost ship's passage. The triumphant, savage energy that had fueled the Stingray during its 3-day hunt had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion that seeped into the very steel of the boat. The air, once thick with the smells of cordite, oil, and adrenaline, now carried the heavier, more permanent stench of sweat, fear, and a grim, unspoken knowledge. They slipped through the deep, running silent not for tactical advantage, but out of a collective, somber respect. The crew moved like automatons, performing their duties with a quiet efficiency, their laughter and boisterous talk extinguished. The only sounds were the hum of the motors, the whisper of the air circulators, and the ever-present, now accusatory, creak of the hull. Art Lynch returned to his sonar shack, but he rarely put on the headphones. The world of pure sound he had once mastered now felt tainted. When he did listen, he didn't hear targets or threats. He heard the echoes of the destroyer breaking apart, the memory of its screws seizing in their final, desperate rotation, the fading cries from the water that his mind insisted were still there, just below the threshold of hearing. He stood his watch on the bridge as they finally approached Pearl Harbor. The dawn broke over the Hawaiian Islands, painting the sky in soft pastels. The green peaks of Oahu rose from the mist, a vision of serene, solid beauty after the formless, killing sea. They passed the wreck of the USS Arizona, her rusted superstructure a skeletal finger pointing skyward from the oil-stained water, a permanent grave and a reminder that this war was one of vengeance as much as victory. As they navigated the channel towards the sub-base, the scale of their legend became apparent. Word of their patrol had preceded them. Other submarines, tied up at docks, flew their signal flags in a vibrant salute. Crews lined the decks, not cheering, but watching in a silence that was more powerful than any roar. They were looking at the boat that had done the impossible. The destroyer killer. The men who had sent 6 ships to the bottom in 72 hours. The Stingray nudged against the dock. Lines were thrown and secured. The war was, for a moment, over. Captain Heller assembled the crew on the deck for the final, official words. He looked older, the lines on his face etched deeper by the pressure of the deep and the weight of command. He spoke of their courage, their skill, their historic achievement. He praised their ingenuity in solving the torpedo problem. The men stood at attention, their uniforms stained and worn, their eyes fixed on some distant point. Then his gaze found Art. And we owe our lives, and our success, to the sharpest ears in the Pacific Fleet. You men remember the name Arthur Lynch. The Navy may never know what he did, but we will. There were nods, a few murmured words of agreement, hands clapping him on the back. But Art felt numb. The praise was a blanket thrown over a gaping wound. The crew was dismissed, spilling onto the dock towards waiting loved ones, cold beer, and solid ground. Art lingered, his small duffel bag in his hand, watching the reunions, the tight embraces, the tears, the laughter. He saw Chief Brennan engulf his wife and children, the hard man melting away in an instant. He saw the young torpedo men, their bravado returned, already boasting to a circle of admiring sailors from other boats. He was alone. He thought of his father's shop, the quiet tick of 100 clocks, the smell of metal and oil that was about preservation, not destruction. He thought of his father's trembling hands, the hidden wound from a different war. He had thought his war would be clean, a contest of intellect and machinery fought through headphones. He had not understood that to become the space between the ticks, the silent, decisive factor, was to become the void into which lives and ships vanished forever. His father's war had left a tremor in his hands. Art's had carved a hollow in his soul. He walked down the gangplank, his feet feeling unsteady on the immovable concrete of the dock. He didn't look back at the Stingray, her hull scarred and stained, a killer resting in a peaceful harbor. He just walked, the sounds of celebration fading behind him, until the only thing left was the echo of what they had done, and the ghost of the watchmaker who had timed the end of the world for 6 ships. Their story was almost lost to the deep. But there are countless others, tales of courage, sacrifice, and impossible choices that never made the official reports. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, to echo through time so we never forget the price that was paid, then subscribe now. We are their voice. Help us make sure they are always heard.